In this tutorial we'll be exploring tiles, the central concept that Theme2 is built on. These tiles utilise CSS Flexbox to respond to the size of the screen of a device. This means as the screen size changes, the tiles will respond to fit the available space. There are several different tile types that are provided as part of Theme2, and we'll look at each of these in this tutorial. First, we have our standard tile. This is a tile containing a header, content area for your application to display its content, and a set of CRUD buttons that allow you to create, read, update and delete records in your application. Next, we have our advanced tile. This is the same as the standard tile, but the buttons have no associated actions, so you'll need to configure these yourself. Next, we have a blank tile. This tile is provided completely empty and allows you the freedom to create your own tile content. Next, we have our split tile. The split tile provides two tiles where you would normally receive one. Next, we have our expanding tiles. These tiles contain an area that can be expanded or contracted by the user using a show or hide button. We have a map tile. This is a pre-configured tile that contains an integrated Google map that you can then link to the content on your application in order to show an area or a particular address. To achieve this, you'll need to select the URL component inside your map tile. This will open up its properties, and in the URL section you'll need to enter your Google API key, and also after the plus, the field which you'll be using to drive your map. So for example, you can see I've entered my Google API key here, and the map is set to look at the city field that's on my form. Now all I need to do is lock my dashboard or switch to application mode to show my map. Next, we have tabs tiles. There are two kinds. The first provides an icon and a text header, and the second is an icon only. Finally, we have our resizable tile. What this allows you to do is to give the user the opportunity to resize the tile themselves. Here we have an example tile. If we open its properties and navigate to the style settings, we'll see that it's using Flexbox. The tile itself is set up to use column, which means that the items placed inside it will be spaced out vertically. We have no wrap, which means the items will only ever stack on top of each other. Justify is set to flex start, which means they always begin underneath each other, and the alignment is set to stretch, which means the tile will stretch its content to fill the available space. If we look in the repository, we'll be able to see the contents of our tile. Here we have a header, tile content container, and a tile footer container, and these have all been spaced out vertically. Now when it comes to editing your own tiles, you'll probably use one of the pre-configured tiles, in which case if we have a look at the tile content container, we can see that it also uses CSS Flexbox to handle its layout. And if we scroll down in the style settings, we'll have a look at its Flexbox settings. If we look at the direction, we can see it's set to row, which means all of the content will be laid out horizontally. This time it is set to wrap, which means as soon as we run out of space on our row, we'll start a new row. Justify means we always start at the beginning of the row when we've set it to flex start, and the alignment is stretch, which means that the content container will stretch its content to use the available space. We'll have a separate video on Flexbox and look into this in more detail. In this video, we'll only look briefly at these settings. Here we have three areas on our dashboard. At the moment, the direction is set to row. If I change the direction to column, we'll see that the boxes have now been stacked vertically in a column. This is useful to know for when we need to edit our tiles. What is worth also noting here is that these style settings are applied to the object, which means they will only impact the specific tile we're working on. However, if we wanted to change all tile content containers, we could open up its shared style, edit its properties, such as adding a background colour or maybe a drop shadow, and then all objects using this shared style will be updated. So let's look at a practical example. We'll add a grid to our dashboard, and we'll also add some fields that allow us to update that grid. So to start with, I'll open up my palette. I'm going to use a tile blank to hold my grid. So I'll drag that onto the body tile container on the right hand side. I will now see that that grid has been added to our dashboard. Now I want this to be the first tile, so I'll move it up. And also, I want to change the body tile container from using a row layout to a column layout. Next, we'll need some data to add to our grid on this tile. Here I'm going to pin my stream so I can keep using it throughout this process. I'll drag the FX symbol onto my tile, and I'll tell Fixflow that I want to create a grid. I can now select my attributes and drag these onto the header of my grid. With the attributes added, I can now look at adding in the fields in the tile below. So I'll go back to my stream and begin adding my attributes. So here I'm just going to add the first 4. If I drag these onto my tile using Shift, this will add them to the content area, and we'll see that they get laid out in a horizontal fashion. A more desirable layout may be to use columns. So we've provided this field column which will allow you to add the attributes to a column. And the way that we can use this, and we'll correct it here, if we go back to our repository and inside our tile content container, we'll see we have our attributes, and I'll add this field collection into my content container. We'll call this column 1. And now I can add my attributes, holding Shift and dragging them into column 1. We'll see they've been neatly laid out. So if we want to add a second column, I can drag that straight onto the tile, column 2, and add the rest of my attributes. Now this is useful if you want to group up your attributes. You can add a third column and set it to auto size to take up the available space. Now the columns have been designed with a dotted line around the edge, and that's on purpose. It's just to show you where the columns have been added. But that dotted line is added to the object, which means you can then go in and remove that once you're happy with your layout. So select your column, go to its CSS properties, and you'll find a single border here, which we can then remove. Before we go, let's have a look at adding in that description box with the auto size.